everything. Before your life can change, your mind must be free. Most people don't realize how much emotional weight they carry, old memories still shaping today's reactions, everything. Hidden wounds controlling thoughts and buried pain silently limiting growth. But the moment you decide to release what no longer serves you, the world inside you begins to shift, everything. Healing isn't about forgetting the past, it's about reclaiming your power from it. This audiobook is your invitation to step into emotional clarity, inner peace, everything, and a mind that finally breathes again. You don't always notice the moment a prison is built around you. There isn't a loud sound, no slamming metal door, everything. No dramatic moment announcing that something inside you has changed. Instead, the walls rise slowly, shaped by experiences you didn't choose, everything. Emotions you never had the right tools to process, and moments that cut deeper than you ever admitted. And because it all happened quietly, everything. You learn to live inside those walls as if they were part of who you are. You stopped questioning them. You stopped noticing them. They became the invisible background of your life, everything. Influencing how you think, how you react, and how you show up in the world. Every person carries memories they never truly unpacked. Childhood moments that left them feeling unheard, everything. Teenage years filled with confusion they never expressed. Adult experiences that asked them to keep moving when all they wanted was a moment to breathe. These fragments accumulate, everything, stacking on top of each other until they become a kind of emotional architecture inside you. And even though these moments happened years ago, everything, your mind still uses them as reference points for your present. That's how the unseen prison forms, not from one big event, everything, but from the countless small ones that you never allowed yourself to fully understand. Most people think they've moved on because time has passed. But time alone doesn't heal anything, everything, and only buries it. And buried pain is still active pain. You may not consciously think about what hurt you, but the emotional imprint is still there, everything, influencing your decisions in ways you don't even realize. Maybe you pull back from opportunities, convinced you're not ready. Maybe you struggle to trust people, everything, even when they've done nothing to harm you. Maybe you keep choosing comfort over courage because somewhere inside, everything, your mind learned that playing small feels safer than risking disappointment. Picture someone who grew up always being told to stay quiet, not cause trouble, not take up too much space, everything. That person might grow into an adult who still apologizes for things that aren't their fault, who hesitates to speak in meetings, who hides their ideas even when they know they're valuable. Everything. They're not timid by nature. They're not weak. They're simply living inside a mental script written years ago, one that never got rewritten. And because they've lived in it for so long, everything, they don't see it as a script, they see it as their personality. Or imagine someone who experienced rejection in a moment when they were vulnerable. Maybe a parent dismissed their feelings, everything. Maybe a partner walked away without explanation. Maybe a friend they trusted betrayed them. That moment, even if brief, plants a seed of fear, and that fear grows into a belief, everything. Opening up means getting hurt. So now, as an adult, they hold back emotionally. They love carefully, cautiously, always managing the distance so they never feel that sting again, everything. They avoid deep conversations, avoid expressing needs, avoid letting anyone get close enough to touch the old wound. Not because they don't want connection, they desperately do, everything, but because the prison built from that past moment controls the level of closeness they allow. This is how quietly emotional prisons form, not out of weakness, but out of survival, everything. You adapt because that's what humans do. You learn to protect yourself the best way you can, even if that protection slowly becomes limitation, everything. And the most dangerous prisons are always the ones you don't notice, the ones that feel like, this is just who I am. But the truth is more hopeful than you might believe, everything. These walls aren't permanent. They were built by experience, not destiny, and anything built can be dismantled, everything. The first step in freeing your mind is learning to recognize the walls you didn't know were there. Sometimes it starts with paying attention to your reactions, not the situation, everything, but your instinctive emotional response. Why does criticism feel like a personal attack instead of feedback? Why does someone's silence make you anxious? Everything. Why do you overthink every decision as if the wrong one will ruin everything? These reactions are clues, not flaws. They point you toward the moments your mind learned to protect itself. Everything. Other times, the clues appear in your patterns. You may notice that you always choose relationships where you give more than you receive. Everything. or you avoid people who genuinely care because their presence feels unfamiliar, or you start projects with excitement but abandon them when they get challenging. Everything. Patterns are not coincidences. They are the echoes of previous emotional experiences still shaping your choices today. And then there are beliefs. Everything. The quiet sentences you tell yourself without questioning. I'm not enough. Good things don't happen for people like me. If I don't do everything perfectly, everything. People won't respect me. These beliefs aren't truths, they're conclusions your younger self made based on moments that felt overwhelming. Everything. But your life doesn't have to continue being governed by a younger version of you who didn't have the awareness, the tools, or the strength you now possess. Once you see the prison, everything, you can begin loosening its hold. You don't have to dismantle the entire structure at once. You start small. Everything. You start by noticing one moment when your reaction feels bigger than the situation. Then you trace it back. What does this remind me of? When did I first feel this way? Everything. What was I trying to protect myself from? Even if you can't answer every question, the act of reflecting breaks the automatic cycle. You might recall a time when you were judged unfairly. Everything. And now every judgment feels threatening. You might remember growing up in a household where mistakes were punished. Everything. And now your adult self avoids risks because you still carry the emotional memory of that fear. Awareness doesn't erase pain, but it gives you power over it. Everything. Once you begin understanding your unconscious pattern, something shifts. You stop blaming yourself. You stop feeling defective. You stop believing that your struggles define your worth. Everything. Instead, you begin seeing your reactions as old survival mechanisms, once useful, now outdated. And just as your mind learned to protect you, it can learn to free you. Everything. Every moment of self-awareness chips away at the walls. Every time you question a belief, the foundation weakens. Every time you choose a new response, even if it feels uncomfortable or unfamiliar, you widen the doorway to your own freedom. Imagine someone who always avoided conflict because, as a child, conflict meant chaos. Now, everything. They try something new, calmly expressing a boundary. Their voice shakes. Their body feels tense. But they do it anyway. That single act becomes a crack in the wall that confined them. Everything. Or imagine someone who always believed they weren't worthy of love. One day, they let themselves accept a compliment without dismissing it. That tiny moment becomes an act of healing. Everything. A reminder that their self-image is not immovable. Healing isn't dramatic, it's subtle. It's a series of small choices that gently dismantle the emotional architecture constructed over years. Everything. And with every step, your mind grows lighter. You start noticing space where there used to be pressure. You start feeling possibilities where there used to be fear. Everything. You begin to recognize that the prison was never built to punish you. It was built to protect you. And now you're strong enough to move beyond it. As you continue to reflect and grow, everything, you discover that your thoughts become clearer. Your reactions become calmer. Your sense of identity begins to shift from survival to strength. And in those moments of clarity, everything, you can finally see the world outside the walls, a world where you are not defined by past pain, where you are not limited by old wounds. Everything, where you are free to create a new version of yourself based on who you are now, not who you were forced to be then. And as this awareness deepens, you realize something powerful. Everything. The door to the prison was never locked. It was waiting for you to notice it, waiting for you to understand the truth about your mind, your history, and your emotional patterns. Everything. Waiting for the moment you finally decide to walk into the open space of your own potential. That moment begins here, with this awareness. Everything. With this willingness to see what you couldn't see before. The walls may have shaped you, but they don't have to define you. Your past may have influenced you, but it doesn't own you. Everything. You are not trapped, you are awakening. There comes a moment in every person's life when the weight they've been carrying becomes impossible to ignore. It shows up quietly at first. Everything. Through overreactions to small things, through emotional exhaustion that doesn't match the day. Everything. Through a tightening in the chest that feels like you're trying to live while holding your breath. And then one day, everything. You realize the heaviness isn't coming from the world outside you. It's coming from everything you've kept inside. The resentment you never voiced. The regret you never admitted. Everything. The pressure you've placed on yourself for years. Trying to be stronger than you felt. Trying to look unaffected when you were anything but. Everything. This chapter is the moment you finally set that weight down. Releasing emotional weight doesn't happen in one dramatic moment of clarity. It begins with something much simpler: awareness. Everything. Imagine you're standing in a room filled with boxes. Some are small memories, others are heavy regrets, and the biggest ones are filled with the things you never allowed yourself to feel. Everything. You don't need to open all the boxes at once. You just need to acknowledge that they're there. Everything. Most of us walk through life tripping over the same boxes again and again without ever asking ourselves why they're still taking up space. Everything. Emotional release starts with the courage to look around the room and say, "This is mine, and I no longer want to carry it." Everything. Many people think letting go means forgiving someone who never apologized or pretending a painful moment didn't actually hurt. But true emotional release is far more personal. Everything. Far more internal. It's not about making peace with others. It's about making peace with the parts of yourself you abandoned just to keep going. Everything. It's about learning to stop punishing yourself for things you didn't know then but understand now. It's about giving yourself permission to put down burdens you picked up out of survival. Everything. Even if those burdens have become familiar. Think back to a time when you held onto something long after the moment had passed, an argument replaying in your mind. Everything. A mistake you kept reliving, a decision you wished you could rewrite. You might have believed that holding on to it kept you safe, prepared, or guarded. Everything. But emotional weight doesn't protect you. It traps you. It freezes you in old versions of yourself. It makes every step forward feel heavier than it should be. Everything. There's a story about a woman who carried a backpack filled with stones everywhere she went. Everything. Some were labeled, "Things I should have done." Others marked, "Things they said about me." And a few simply read, "Not good enough." She became so used to the weight that she didn't even notice it anymore. Everything. She forgot it wasn't a part of her body. But one day she met someone who carried nothing. They walked lightly, breathed deeply, laughed freely. And for the first time, everything. She wondered what it would feel like to take off the backpack, even just for a moment. When she finally removed it, her knees almost buckled. Not from weakness, everything, but from the overwhelming realization of how heavy it had always been. Emotional weight is like that. You don't understand its full weight until you finally release it. Everything. Releasing what you've carried begins with honesty. Honest conversations with yourself. Honest recognition of what hurts. Honest acceptance of the emotions you once labeled as inconvenient. Everything, dramatic, or too much. You cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge. You cannot release what you pretend doesn't exist. So start by naming the emotion. Is it resentment? Is it guilt? Everything. Is it disappointment? Is it heartbreak? Words open doors. Once you can name the weight, you can begin to loosen its grip. Everything. One of the most powerful steps in emotional release is allowing yourself to feel what you've spent years avoiding. Not drowning in it, not reliving it endlessly, just feeling it. Everything. For a moment. Letting the emotion move through you instead of keeping it locked inside. Think of it like exhaling deeply after holding your breath for too long. The release is uncomfortable. Everything. But it's necessary. Every suppressed emotion is a breath you never exhaled, waiting for the moment you finally let it go. Sometimes the weight you carry isn't yours. Everything. It comes from expectations that others placed on you, from roles you never chose but felt obligated to fulfill. Maybe you became the strong one in your family, the reliable friend. Everything. The one who held everything together while silently falling apart. Maybe you learned early that showing emotion made others uncomfortable, so you trained yourself to stay quiet. Everything. Maybe you absorbed guilt, fear, or pain that didn't belong to you but somehow became part of your identity. Emotional release is also the process of returning what was never yours to hold. Everything. It can feel unfamiliar at first. You might reach for old patterns without realizing it. The instinct to overthink, to self-blame. Everything. To shrink yourself so others don't feel overwhelmed by your needs. But healing requires new habits. It requires choosing lightness over heaviness, peace over chaos. Everything. Understanding over self-criticism. It requires gently reminding yourself, again and again, that you deserve to feel free. Not someday, not when everything is perfect, but now. Everything. Imagine sitting by a river with a stack of papers, each one representing something you've held on to for years. On one, you write a mistake you've revisited far too many times. On another, everything. You write the words someone once said to you that still live in your mind. On a third, you write the fear that's kept you stuck. Everything. Then you place each paper in the river and watch it drift away. Not because the memory disappears, but because the power it once had dissolves. Everything. Emotional release is an internal version of this gentle letting go. You don't erase your past, you release its hold on your present. Everything. There is a certain peace that comes when you stop resisting your own emotions, when you stop telling yourself to just move on, and instead ask, everything. What is this trying to teach me? Emotional weight always has a message. Resentment often reveals boundaries you never set. Regret highlights values you forgot to honor. Everything. Pressure points to standards that were unrealistic from the start. When you listen to what the weight has been trying to say, it becomes easier to let it go. But letting go is not passive. Everything. It's an active choice you make every day. A choice to stop revisiting pain you've already learned from. A choice to stop rehearsing conversations you'll never have. Everything. A choice to stop defining yourself by versions of you that no longer exist. Healing happens in small moments. The moment you choose forgiveness, not for them, but for your own freedom. Everything. The moment you choose compassion instead of judgment. The moment you choose to speak kindly to yourself. Every one of these choices releases a little more of the weight. Everything. There will be days when the heaviness tries to return. That's normal. Emotional weight can be persistent, especially when it's been part of your identity for years. Everything. But now you'll recognize it. You'll understand it. And instead of carrying it, you'll know how to loosen your grip. You'll pause. Breathe. Acknowledge. Release. And each time you do, everything. The weight loses strength. You deserve a life where your heart feels light. You deserve a mind that isn't cluttered with old memories and silent pressures. Everything. You deserve to walk through your days with clarity, confidence, and emotional space to grow. Releasing the weight you've carried isn't about forgetting your past. Everything. It's about freeing yourself to live fully in your present. And that freedom begins with one simple realization: you don't have to carry it anymore. Rewiring how you think, feel, everything, and respond begins with a simple truth: your mind is not fixed. It is not a rigid machine locked into patterns that can't be changed. It is an adaptable, living system. Everything. Constantly reshaping itself based on what you feed it, what you focus on, and what you choose to believe. Most people never realize just how much power they have over their own mental world. Everything. They assume their reactions are automatic, that their habits are ingrained, that their thoughts are simply who they are. But the reality is far more empowering. Everything. You are not only capable of changing the way you think, you are capable of rebuilding the entire internal framework that shapes your emotional life. Everything. You can train your mind the way a musician trains their ear or an athlete trains their reflexes. And once you understand that, everything, you stop feeling controlled by your thoughts and start becoming the one who directs them. When we talk about rewiring everything, it's not about pretending everything is positive or forcing yourself to be happy. Real mental rewiring is about awareness, intention, and practice. Everything. It's about noticing what you usually overlook, choosing responses instead of reacting automatically, and teaching your mind a new way of processing the world. Everything. Think of someone who has always believed they're not good enough. Every challenge triggers anxiety. Every small mistake brings a wave of shame. Every compliment gets deflected. Everything. They're not consciously choosing these reactions. They're repeating mental patterns formed long ago, patterns that might have been shaped by criticism, rejection, everything, or expectations they could never meet. But here's the turning point: once that person becomes aware of the pattern loses power. Awareness is the first cut in the old wiring. Everything. Intention rewires it. Practice reinforces the new connection. Imagine a moment in your own life when someone criticized you harshly, maybe a parent, a teacher, a partner, or even a boss. Everything. Think of how quickly your mind grabbed hold of the criticism and replayed it, reinforcing it like it was the only truth that mattered. Everything. The emotional response happened before you even understood why. You felt smaller, you felt tense, you felt like you failed. Everything. Most people live their whole lives letting moments like that define their emotional script. But now imagine if you could pause that moment the next time it happens. Everything. Imagine noticing the emotional punch before it fully settles, then reminding yourself that someone else's words do not dictate your worth. That pause, just a few seconds of awareness, everything, is the beginning of rewiring. Because the mind learns from repetition. It learns from what you reinforce. And every time you choose a new response, even a slightly healthier one, everything, you're building a new circuit, a new habit, a new emotional instinct. Everything. One of the simplest and most effective ways to rewire your thinking is to challenge the stories your mind has been repeating for years. Everyone walks around with stories. Everything. Stories about what they can or can't do. Stories about what other people think of them. stories about how the world works. Some stories are empowering, but many are limiting. I always mess up. No one ever stays. I'm not that smart. My emotions are too much. These stories aren't facts, everything. They're scripts you've rehearsed so often that your mind treats them as truth. If you want emotional strength, you must interrupt the script. You have to ask everything. Is this thought helping me or hurting me? And more importantly, who told me this in the first place? When you start questioning your thoughts, something powerful happens. Everything. Instead of being a passenger inside your mind, you become the driver. You begin to separate your identity from your mental habits, and slowly, everything. The thoughts that once controlled you begin to lose their grip. That's the internal rewiring, your brain learning that old fears are not commands, old assumptions are not truths, everything, and old wounds do not have the right to dictate your present. Another key part of mental rewiring is learning to respond instead of react. Reactions are automatic. They're fast, emotional, everything, usually driven by old programming. Responses take a moment longer. They come from awareness and deliberate choice. Everything, that small gap between reaction and response, is where emotional strength grows. Consider a moment when someone speaks to you rudely. The automatic reaction might be anger, defensiveness, everything, or shutting down. But when you're rewiring your mind, you catch the spark before it becomes a fire. You take a breath. You assess what's going on. Maybe the person is stressed, everything. Maybe you're tired. Maybe the moment doesn't deserve the energy your reaction wants to give it. And then, instead of reacting emotionally, you choose a response that protects your peace, everything. That is emotional strength, not suppressing emotion, but guiding it. There's a reason this works. The brain changes through repetition. Everything, whatever emotional response you practice, becomes the dominant one. If you repeatedly respond with calm instead of panic, your brain takes note. It starts wiring calmness as the default, everything. If you practice gratitude instead of resentment, resilience instead of self-criticism, patience instead of frustration, your emotional world begins to shift. Not instantly, but consistently, everything. That consistency builds a new identity, a person who is no longer controlled by automatic reactions, but guided by conscious choices, everything. Real-life rewiring doesn't happen in meditation sessions or motivational moments alone. It happens in the everyday situations that test your patience, your confidence, your boundaries, everything, and your inner peace. It happens when the unexpected throws your day off and you choose not to spiral. It happens when someone disappoints you and you choose not to internalize it, everything. It happens when you catch yourself judging your progress and instead remind yourself that growth is not a race. Every small shift adds up. Every healthier thought plants a seed, everything, and every seed grows into a habit that becomes a new emotional reality. Think of a person who used to assume the worst in every situation. They believed people would fail them, everything, that opportunities were dangerous, that mistakes were disasters. Their life felt heavy because their mind interpreted everything through fear, everything. But then they started paying attention to their thoughts. They noticed the fear rising. They labeled it instead of believing it. They began replacing worst-case scenarios with realistic ones, everything, and then, slowly, with hopeful ones. A year later, they still feel fear sometimes, but they no longer live under its rule. Their entire nervous system responds differently, everything. Not because life changed, but because they rewired the way they think about it. Your mind works the same way. Every time you choose self-awareness over autopilot, you're building strength, everything. Every time you choose a healthier interpretation, you're building clarity. Every time you protect your peace instead of chasing approval, you're building identity, everything. And the more you practice these small acts, the stronger they become. Emotional power isn't built in sudden breakthroughs. It's built in tiny rewrites, everything. Moments where you catch the old pattern and choose something better. One of the most transformative mental shifts you can create is learning not to take every thought personally, everything. Your mind generates thousands of thoughts a day. Some are reflections of your past, some are echoes of other people's voices. Some are fears, memories, guesses, or exaggerations, everything. Not all of them deserve your attention. When you stop treating every thought as meaningful, you create emotional distance. A moment of stress becomes just a moment, not a story, everything. A mistake becomes a lesson, not an identity. A fear becomes a signal, not a destiny. This shift alone can change your sense of control more than almost anything else, everything. As you continue rewiring your emotional responses, you'll notice something subtle but powerful. Your inner world becomes quieter. The constant rush of overthinking begins to slow, everything. The emotional storms lose their intensity. You feel more grounded, more present, more capable. You begin responding to life from the version of you that is growing, everything. Not the version that was shaped by old pain. And that feeling, the feeling of being in control of your own mental landscape, is one of the most empowering experiences a human being can have. Everything. Rewiring your mind is not about perfection. It's not about controlling every thought or eliminating emotions. It's about direction. It's about steering your inner world toward strength. Everything. Clarity and peace, one decision at a time. One thought at a time. One reaction turned into a response. One moment of awareness that becomes a turning point. Everything. And as each of those moments accumulates, you begin to feel yourself changing from the inside out. You stand a little taller. You breathe a little deeper. Everything. You face challenges with a mindset that says, I can handle this. You begin living as someone who isn't shaped by old patterns, but is consciously shaping new ones. And that shift, everything, subtle at first, powerful over time, is how you transform into the person you were always capable of becoming. Everything. There comes a moment in every person's life when the noise becomes too loud to ignore. A moment when you realize that the world has poured so many expectations, opinions, pressures, everything, and invisible responsibilities onto your shoulders that you can no longer hear your own voice clearly. And in that moment, something inside you whispers, not loudly, not forcefully, everything, but gently reminding you that you were someone before the world told you who to be. This chapter is about turning toward that whisper, everything. It's about finding your way back to the person within you who has been waiting patiently, hoping you'd return. Reconnecting with your true self doesn't happen in one dramatic breakthrough. Everything. It's a quiet unfolding, like morning light touching a dark room. It begins with recognizing how easy it is to drift away from yourself without ever meaning to. Everything. Stress pulls you in one direction, trauma anchors you in another, expectations stretch you thin, and emotional noise fills the remaining space. And slowly, almost invisibly, everything. You start reacting to life instead of living it. You start performing instead of being. You start surviving instead of becoming. Everything. Think back to a time in your life when you felt most like yourself, not the version that took shape to please others, not the version molded by fear or self-doubt. Everything. But the version that felt alive, curious, grounded, and honest. Maybe it was childhood before you cared what anyone thought. Everything. Maybe it was a moment in adulthood when you made a choice that felt aligned with your values. Maybe it was a small decision or a bold one, but you knew in that instant, this is who I am. Everything. That moment wasn't accidental. It was your inner truth resurfacing. The truth is your authentic self never disappears. It only gets buried. And anything buried can be uncovered again. Everything. So the journey begins with awareness. You start by noticing the places where you've abandoned yourself, the moments when you silenced your own needs. Everything. The habits that disconnect you from your core, and the beliefs you internalized without realizing they weren't yours. This kind of awareness isn't meant to create regret. Everything. It's meant to create clarity. Many people live years, sometimes decades, without ever questioning why they do what they do. They wake up, move through routines, sacrifice their desires, everything, suppress emotions, and perform roles taught to them by family, culture, or past experiences. But somewhere beneath all that conditioning, the real self waits, and it waits without resentment. Everything. That's the beauty of your true identity. It doesn't punish you for drifting away. It just welcomes you back when you're ready. Everything. Imagine standing at the edge of a quiet lake early in the morning. There's no wind. The water is still. If you look down, you see your reflection clearly. Everything. But the moment the world around you becomes loud, chaotic schedules, emotional wounds, unresolved conflict, it's like someone throws stones into the water. The surface ripples, distorts, everything loses clarity. And for a while you can't recognize yourself. But once the ripples settle, the reflection returns unchanged. This is your inner truth. Always present, sometimes hidden. Everything. Never lost. One of the most important steps in reconnecting with your true self is learning to sit with silence again. Not the uncomfortable silence that feels like a void, everything, but the intentional silence that allows you to hear your own thoughts without distraction. When you give yourself even a moment of stillness, everything, you begin to notice what feels authentic and what feels forced. You notice which choices are yours and which choices are inherited. Everything. You discover the difference between what you actually want and what you've been told you should want. Some people realize in quiet moments, everything, that their entire identity has been shaped around avoiding disapproval. Others realize they've built a life that looks good from the outside, but feels hollow inside. Everything. Others discover that their business has been a way to outrun emotional pain. These realizations aren't failures, they're breakthroughs. Everything. They're the first steps toward returning home to yourself. Reconnection also involves releasing the stories you've been carrying. Stories written by fear. Everything. Stories handed down by people who didn't know better. Stories born in moments of pain that made you believe you were smaller, weaker, or less worthy than you truly are. Everything. Healing doesn't require erasing the past. It requires rewriting the meaning of it. You remind yourself that you survived, that you grew. Everything. That every scar on your heart taught you a language of resilience no one else can speak the same way you can. Everything. Think of someone who spent years believing they weren't enough because of childhood criticism. They enter adulthood with a voice in their mind that isn't theirs, whispering limitations. Everything. Over time, they forget the original dream they once had, the dream that made their eyes brighten and their energy rise. But when they pause long enough to listen inward, everything, they begin to hear another voice underneath the criticism. A quieter voice, but a true one. It's the voice that says, you were meant for more than the harm you experienced. Everything. You were meant to grow beyond it. That rediscovery is the beginning of emotional restoration. Another key part of reconnecting with yourself is giving permission to feel again. Everything. Most people numb their emotions without realizing it, through work, entertainment, distraction, or pretending everything is fine. But numbness doesn't protect you from pain. Everything. It protects you from truth. And truth is what leads you back to yourself. When you allow yourself to feel your sadness, you uncover your unmet needs. Everything. When you allow yourself to feel your anger, you identify your boundaries. When you allow yourself to feel your fear, you discover where healing is needed. Everything. And when you allow yourself to feel your joy, you reconnect with the things that make you come alive. Every emotion is a messenger. Everything. Every emotion points you toward the self you lost along the way. Sometimes reconnecting with yourself means stepping back from people who benefit from your disconnection. Everything. Not everyone wants you to know your worth. Not everyone wants you to set boundaries, speak honestly, or choose peace. When you grow, everything, it shines a light on what others haven't confronted within themselves, and that can make them uncomfortable. But your healing is not a burden. Your transformation is not a problem. Everything. You do not need permission to return to yourself. Imagine someone who finally begins to honor their needs after years of self-neglect. They start saying no. They start prioritizing rest. Everything. They start choosing relationships that feel safe instead of relationships that drain them. And suddenly, everything. People who were used to their compliance call them different. But that's the moment they should whisper to themselves, I'm not different. I'm becoming who I actually am. Everything. An essential part of reconnecting with yourself is remembering what once brought you joy. As children, joy was easy. We didn't analyze it or justify it. We followed what felt natural. Everything. As adults, we often dismiss the things that light us up because they don't seem productive or practical. But joy is not a luxury. It's a compass. The activities, places, everything, and moments that ignite your soul reveal who you are beneath layers of responsibility. When you reclaim joy, you reclaim identity. Reconnection also means allowing yourself to change. Everything. Sometimes the person you're reconnecting with isn't the old version of you. It's a new one emerging. You're not required to return to who you once were. Healing means you get to evolve. Everything. You get to redefine yourself as many times as necessary. Your true self is not a fixed point. It's the deepest, most honest expression of who you are becoming. Everything. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this journey is realizing that your true self was never broken. Wounded, maybe. Exhausted, yes. Hidden, definitely. But never broken. Everything. Under every layer of fear, stress, expectation, and emotional noise, there remains a core of strength, clarity, and worthiness that no experience could destroy. Everything. You are not rebuilding yourself. You are returning to yourself. And as you reconnect with that inner truth slowly, gently, courageously, you begin to feel a quiet joy rising. Not the loud, everything, explosive joy that fades quickly, but the deep, steady joy of recognizing your own reflection again. The joy of feeling whole. The joy of coming home to yourself. Everything. Your life may not transform overnight, but your inner world begins to soften, open, and realign. And one day, without realizing when the shift happened, everything. You wake up feeling present in your own life again. You feel grounded. You feel honest. You feel like you're finally living from the inside out instead of the outside in. And that feeling, everything, of returning to your true self, is one of the greatest forms of emotional healing you will ever experience. When you reach the point where healing is no longer just something you fight for, everything, but something you live for, everything begins to shift. You start looking at your days differently. You start noticing what drains you, what lifts you, everything, and what quietly pulls you back toward the person you used to be. Building a life that supports your healing is not a single decision, everything. It's the slow and steady construction of a new inner world, one where peace isn't occasional, but consistent, and where clarity becomes the default rather than the prize. Everything. This chapter is about stepping into that world and choosing, piece by piece, to create a life that doesn't reopen your wounds, but gently stitches them together. Everything. You begin with your environment because whether you notice it or not, the spaces you live in either nourish your healing or sabotage it. Everything. Many people underestimate how much their surroundings influence their emotional state. Think about how it feels to walk into a cluttered room when your mind is already overwhelmed. Everything. Even if you don't say it out loud, your brain tightens, your breathing changes, your nervous system reacts. And then think about a moment when you walked into a clean, calm space. Everything. The kind where everything feels intentional. It's subtle, but your shoulders drop, your thoughts slow down, and something inside you feels more possible. Healing isn't just internal, everything. It's influenced by every detail around you. Imagine someone who has spent years living in emotional chaos. Their room is full of unfinished reminders, old memories, everything, and items tied to versions of themselves they're trying to outgrow. Every time they open a drawer, they're reopening their past. But the day they decide to slowly, patiently clear out what no longer matches their healing is the day the energy of their environment begins to shift. They aren't just cleaning, they're choosing themselves, everything. They're choosing lightness. They're choosing a home that reflects the future they're growing into, not the past they're escaping. Once your environment supports your healing, everything, your habits begin to matter. People often think habits must be dramatic or perfect, but healing is supported by consistency, not intensity, everything. A habit rooted in healing doesn't need to be impressive, it just needs to anchor you, everything. Even something as simple as starting the morning with 2 minutes of stillness can reset the emotional tone of an entire day. For someone else, everything. A walk in the evening becomes the space where unresolved feelings finally breathe. For another, journaling becomes the bridge between chaos and clarity, everything. What matters is that you choose habits that calm your system, strengthen your perspective, and remind you daily that you are building something meaningful inside yourself, everything. There is a moment in every healing journey when a person realizes that habits aren't about discipline, they're about identity. The person you want to become needs certain routines to survive, everything. If you want peace, your habits must reflect peace. If you want clarity, your habits must create clarity. If you want emotional freedom, then every small choice must serve that freedom, everything, not sabotage it. You don't force these habits, you grow into them, and the more you repeat them, the more natural they feel, until eventually they become part of who you are, everything. But healing also requires boundaries that feel uncomfortable at first because they challenge old patterns of pleasing, accepting, or staying silent. When you begin to heal everything, you start hearing the quiet voice inside you that says, I can't keep saying yes to people who drain me, or I can't keep ignoring my own needs just to keep the peace. And at first, everything, you resist this voice. It feels unfamiliar, it feels selfish, but over time you learn that boundaries aren't walls, they're pathways to emotional freedom, everything. They separate what harms you from what helps you. They teach people how to treat you, but more importantly, they teach you how to treat yourself, everything. Picture someone who has spent years saying yes to every demand, every favor, every expectation. It's not because they wanted to, but because they feared the consequences of saying no, everything for them. Healing begins the day they whisper their first boundary. It may be small, it may be shaky, but it's real. And once they experience the quiet power of protecting their energy, everything, they realize that every boundary isn't a confrontation, it's a declaration of self-respect. With each one, they step deeper into a life that honors their emotional well-being, everything. As your boundaries strengthen, your relationships begin to shift. Healing naturally reveals who belongs in your life and who no longer fits the person you're becoming, everything. Some people will support your growth, celebrate your transformation, and walk alongside you. Others will feel threatened by it, not because you've done anything wrong, everything, but because your healing forces them to confront their own unhealed places. You cannot shrink yourself to make others comfortable. Everything. A life that supports your healing requires relationships that respect your peace, honor your growth, and match your emotional maturity. Everything. Sometimes this means outgrowing people you still care about. Sometimes it means choosing distance from someone who once felt essential. It's painful, but it's not a failure. Everything. It's an act of alignment. It's understanding that not every chapter of your life requires the same cast. The people who stay, those who respect your boundaries, understand your journey, everything, and support your healing, are the ones you build your new emotional home around. And while relationships matter, the most important relationship you rebuild is the one with yourself. Everything. Many people don't realize how long they've carried a war inside them, fighting their emotions, doubting their worth, hiding their pain, and criticizing themselves for every imperfect moment. Everything. When you build a life that supports healing, that internal war quiets. You start treating yourself with patience, grace, and kindness. Everything. You give yourself permission to feel instead of suppress. You allow yourself to rest without guilt. You celebrate progress that no one else sees. Everything. You stop expecting perfection and start honoring growth. This shift is subtle but powerful. It's the moment you start speaking to yourself not like an enemy, everything, but like someone you're responsible for nurturing. And when that shift happens, everything else becomes easier. Your choices, your relationships, your habits, your future. Everything. You stop trying to earn worth and start recognizing that you already have it. Everything. Another essential part of building a life that supports healing is learning to choose slowness when your instinct is to rush. Emotional wounds often push us into urgency. Everything. We want solutions now, clarity now, relief now. But healing rarely works on a timeline. It unfolds in its own rhythm, like learning a new language or watching a seed sprout. Everything. The more you try to speed it up, the more resistance you create. But when you allow your healing to move at its natural pace, when you stop demanding immediate answers, everything, you begin to feel a deeper kind of peace. You stop feeling behind. You stop judging your journey. You start trusting your own unfolding. There will be days when old emotions resurface. Everything. Even after you've done everything right. That doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're human. Healing is not linear, and it doesn't need to be. What matters is that your life, everything, the environment you choose, the habits you practice, the boundaries you hold, the relationships you nurture, and the self-kindness you embody, everything, creates a foundation strong enough to catch you when you fall and lift you when you rise. And then, something beautiful happens. You begin to feel a new kind of stability inside you. Everything. It's not loud or dramatic. It's steady, quiet, reliable. A sense that you know who you are becoming, and even if the road is long, you're walking it with intention. Everything. You're building a future where emotional freedom isn't a temporary state, it's a way of living. And with every decision, every boundary, every habit, and every moment of self-respect, everything, you're stepping further into that future.